Let's talk about 2D interaction nodes. To do that, like always, we jump into an empty scene and we switch our layout to logic view. You can find this interaction 2D nodes under the toolbox in the category interaction, and down here you can find all the interactive nodes for Ventuz. Let's talk about the touch button first. I simply drag it inside my hierarchy editor, and then we see already here our inputs and outputs. So that we clearly see something, we need to put also some geometry behind. All the interaction nodes will basically react to everything which is behind. So each geometry you put behind interaction nodes in Ventuz will basically trigger some touch event. So to do that, I simply put a rectangle here behind. Let's go to my geometry, put a rectangle here and scale that a bit larger, or make the size a bit larger, and select our touch button again now. So if we start here with our input properties, you can see we can turn on and off the behavior, we can turn on and off the control. We also can set the intersection type. That's basically if the touch button will react to the bounding box of the geometry behind or on the mesh itself. So if you have very complex meshes, 2D or 3D meshes, and you want that the interaction is only happening on that mesh, then you simply change that here to the mesh. You can also set up a reset behavior and of course the default blocked and inactive states. Now let's focus on the outputs. If I hover with my mouse over that rectangle, then please focus here what's happening here on these outputs. So if I go with my mouse over, then you can see I get a touch inside boolean true. If I left click, then I get that single tap. If I go out with my mouse, I got that touch leave. And if I enter, I also get that event touch enter. Let's talk about the next interaction node. So to do that, I delete its touch button. And now we are talking about a touch translation node. Simply drag and drop that here in front. And now you can also see we have a couple of more options for our inputs and also a couple of more options for our outputs. As you can see, behavior, the control, and we have additional input property, that's the limits, which I will show you now. So if I click with my left mouse button, I can move this rectangle here around, right? So if I move it there, now it's gone and I have no chance to get it because you can see the position of that rectangle is now far, far, far out of our renderer, right? So to get it back, I simply can select here reset and then it will come back. Here you also can say the duration, how it comes back, so to make it a bit smooth, but you also can say put that to 0 and then if you press reset, he simply jump back directly to that initial reset position, which you also can define. You can also activate limits to avoid that this rectangle is going out of the renderer. So let's bring it here to the very right. Then you can see our X is 40.25. Of course, our left would be minus 14 and our Y would be 6.5, right? So let's put it here and let's set up quickly that limits so we can read them out here. So our X, I activate the limits. So our X, I put minus 60.5, our max Y 6.5, our minus Y minus 6.5. Sorry, that was 16.5. And let's do that again. Exactly, that's 60.5. We are minus 6.5 and let's make this 6.5, right? So now you can see I basically limited the transformation or translation of my rectangle only in the renderer, okay? And if I do that with my touch screen, you can see I have exactly the same behavior, right? Let's talk about the next interaction node now. To do that, we simply delete this. And let's talk about our touch rotation node now. So let's drag and drop that touch rotation node here. As you can see, we have pretty similar settings, except the limits only have less values because we're talking about rotation. So we only need a minimum and a maximum rotation, right? Also here the outputs, we get an angle as a new value, and let's try that out. So as you can see, if I rotate now with my mouse, my rectangle, that rectangle will nicely rotate about the defined axis down here, right? As you also see, if I give it a kind of a swipe here, then that rectangle will rotate for quite a while. I also can define that behaviors for certain interaction nodes down here. So you simply select here your interaction node, and then you should have that edit behavior. And here you can see we can simply define some deceleration, some velocity threshold, and some limit elasticity, right? So if we hover over, then you can see if this is set to 0, then the complete velocity will be preserved. So if we, for example, bring that up to 1 and we rotate that guy again, then you can see he will rotate a bit longer. If I even bring down here my deceleration to 0.0.2, then you can see he will even rotate longer. And if I bring that deceleration down to 0 and I rotate this, now this rectangle will basically rotate forever. So let's bring this guy back to kind of default 0.05. That's good. And that was 0.5. Happy with that as well. So let's do that over the buttons. Let's make that 0.4. Doesn't matter. That's all good. And let's rotate it. And as you can see, now we have that default behavior again. Now let's talk about our touch transformation mode. So simply drag and drop that here. As we can see, very similar setups, except the limits are a bit larger because this touch transformation node is basically doing a translation, right? So moving, and you also can scale it and you can rotate it. So this is something you cannot do with a mouse button. This is something you only can do with a touch screen or with our OptiTuyo solution. I have here a simple setup, basically a small touch screen with OptiTuyo, and I also turned on here our input diagnostics. That's that red green dots what you can see. If I use my touch screen now with 2 fingers, then you can see I can scale it up like on the iPad, iPhone, and I also can rotate it if I want to, right? And if I touch with only 1 finger, then I simply can translate it in X and Y. And as well, let's reset it here. Let's talk about the interaction rectangle node now. So if we simply drag that in, then you can see we have already a small rectangle. If I hover over with the mouse, then you also already can see, like with the other nodes, we get already some inputs and outputs. So if I hover over with my mouse, then you can see we get already here our output events. Let's check here the inputs. We can set up an interaction receiver via UDP or NC protocol. We can set up a receiver ID. We can set up a receiver IP and a port. And we also can tell our interaction rectangle, hey, fill out my whole screen, right? And a very interesting thing from this interaction rectangle is down here. You can see that touch 1 point and we get an active, a pressure, and X and Y, right? And as you can see, these X and Y values are clipped or mapped basically from 0 to 1, which is very handy if you want to create volume sliders or other interactive modules, right? And as you also can see here, we have one touch now, but you also can append touches here by simply clicking that. And if we are working with a touch screen like here, then you can see already now we have our mouse here. If I get the mouse out, so we get touch 1, touch 2, touch 3, and so on, right? Let's talk about our next interaction node, and this is our touch paint node. So simply drag and drop that in. And if you can see, we have here also a couple of different options like the behavior, the control, the brush, the texture, and a reset. And if I put that touch paint in, I already ready to paint here something on my screen, right? With the mouse, I can reset it. And let's do that again. I have here options for the brush size. I can turn off here the additive, that we have that clear color. Let me also turn off quickly that input diagnostics. We can make that very small if we want. Let's reset it. And we can, of course, change the color to white, for example, or whatever you like. And we as well can switch that touch paint to eraser, where we simply then can delete or erase what we painted here. And we also can apply textures and things like that. The output from our touch paint are very similar to all the other interaction nodes what we see before. Let's talk about the next interaction node. This is our touch pattern. Let's simply drag and drop the touch pattern inside here. And as you can see, we don't have a lot of inputs, but we have quite a couple of outputs. So we have the touch inside, we have the touch pressed, we have the touch processing, we have the touch enter, touch begin, touch end, touch leave. Then we have different no match, then we have a circle clockwise, a circle counterclockwise, a swipe left, a swipe right, a swipe up, a swipe down, a single tap, and a tap hold. Right? So if we go inside, we have that. So if I make with my mouse a swipe right, you can see we get that swipe right. If I make a swipe left, we get that swipe left. If I try to make a circle, now I make a circle counterclockwise. If I make a circle clockwise, we get the correct events, a swipe up, a swipe down, and a single tap. The last node we are talking about now is our touch excluder. So this touch excluder is basically excluding areas behind some interaction node from that first interaction node. Yeah, so to do that, let's make a simple setup. Let's say we have a touch translation node here. We have a rectangle and we have a color just to see a bit the difference. So let's make this green and let's make that a bit larger. So this is our green button, and let's create another one which is exactly behind our translation node, right? So let's make this maybe red and maybe a bit smaller, and we put that guy right beside our correct. Yes. So if I select both of them, outside nothing will happen. If I select the green one, I can move it. If I press the red one, I can move it. Sure, because everything behind our touch translation node will trigger touch events, right? So this is our green button is behind and our red button is behind as well. So now let's say for whatever reason, let's turn off the bounding box. For whatever reason, I don't want that this guy is reacting to that translation. To do that, I simply drag and drop our touch excluder here. Let's put them maybe here. And now you can see green, I can translate, I can move. And on the red one, nothing will happen. Let's also talk about the last node for this tutorial, and that's our touch ripple node. Let's delete that. So let's bring up our touch ripple. And as you can see, this looks like a switch already with 5 touch inputs basically already, right? So in this touch ripple, we simply have this little circle animation, as you can see, which is simply following my mouse. Or if I go out and if I touch my touch screen, now you can see we have now 2, 3. That first one here, that's the one from our mouse. So if I bring that guy out, you can see we also can move that. And the second now is basically coming from my finger on the touchscreen. So that also means you can bind now behind this guy whatever you want, right? Let's delete all these containers here. And for example, if you say, hey, I simply want to have a white circle on my first touch, you simply put that here. And now you're already able to control this simple circle with your mouse or with your touch, right? So if I want to use it with my touch, I have to put it here behind the second one. And now I'm able to also move that circle with my touch screen, correct?